Good morning. This is the Dr. Obitashaka show. How's everybody doing? I can see that we have Sister Robin on, Brother Ugawa. Uh, Welcome to you and others who will be coming on. This is a important show, um, and we're going to be dealing with the launching of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. It's a part of a series that will be done on the Black Panther Party. So I want to greet this morning Brother Emory Douglas. Brother Emory, how you doing?
Good, Brother Obitashaka. I'm doing very well. Yeah.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Thank you.
Brother Emory is a former member of the Black Panther Party and Minister of Culture, and he was there throughout virtually the entire period of the Black Panther Party. So he's going to be able to give a firsthand account of his involvement and the interaction of people who took part in the party, um, their involvement, and particularly, of course, leading players as well. So this is a very important opportunity for us to get an inside look at the Black Panther Party. And this is on the occasion of Malcolm X's birthday, which was May 19th. And could be no more appropriate representative in our culture for Malcolm on this day than I think the Black Panther Party. So we're honoring Malcolm in spirit, and we'll also be referring to him in terms of his impact on the party. So this is also key for this show. Also, we're looking at the context of what's been happening recently in Buffalo, New York, and the shooting of 13 Black people and the murder of 10 in Buffalo, New York. And so we want to note that in discussing the party, it's also to note that because of the fact that racist violence continues to hit our community. And in the case of the Black Panther Party, they were directly dealing with police violence. And today, of course, we continue to deal with that as well as racist violence in general. So the fact that the murders that happened in Buffalo, leading to the death of 10 Black people in a predominantly Black community, a murder carried out by a man named Peyton S. Genron, that this was in the context of general racism in this country. And in the 60s, you were dealing with police violence, Klan violence. You're dealing with all the terror that comes from the way the system, tries to keep Blacks under control. And today that continues. But now with the demographic shift, where whites are going to be a minority in a short time in this country by 2040, 2044, where Black, brown, red, and yellow people are going to constitute a majority. One of the things that has been driving racist attacks against Blacks has been this notion of the replacement theory. And this replacement theory is one that distorts what's really happening, because what's really happening is demographic changes are occurring, the white birth rate has fallen, the presence of Black and brown, red and yellow people is rising, And so as a result, the demography of the country is going to change to a majority of people of color. California has already reached that level. But the replacement theory distorts what's really happening. And so the replacement theory is saying that white elites, and because those on the right wing, don't believe that black and brown, red and yellow people have enough brains to wield power, they have to blame this power shift on what they consider to be smart white people, in this case, Jews and the ruling class in this country, which is interesting that the right wing would attack a part of the ruling class since they are usually financed by them. And that's been a part of Trump's populism as well. So this idea of replacement theory is that white people are being replaced. It's some great conspiracy being carried out by the elite. And so that a lot of these attacks now are being driven by that. And of course, the election of Trump on the issue of immigration playing a primary role has been central to that as well. And we know that Tucker Carlson, who comes out of Fox News, has been a major articulator of this position, which he's picked up from the right wing. Because at one time he was pro-immigration, but now that he sees that this is something that can rile people up, and I'm sure that he also has a racist core, this has been central to him. So what we have seen is that a number of mass shootings have occurred around the country, and it's come through this, and we're going to have to be on guard and organized and prepared to defend our own communities against attacks of all kinds, including this. And so I think it's appropriate that when we're dealing with the Black Panther Party, that we are dealing with this issue, and our support goes out to our people in general, and particularly those who have been the victims of these attacks and cowardly attacks, which is typical. And it seems that the system is more interested in protecting the attacker than the people, because if you notice, he took down 10 unarmed, innocent black people, but the cops disarmed him. What would happen if black people took a piece of bubble gum and they decided to do something? Or what's happened to black kids who have been using play guns and have been shot down? What's happened to blacks who have been legally armed and have let the police know it, and the police shot them simply because they were armed? But this guy gets taken down when he points the gun at himself and goes into court with an armored vest protecting him. Huh? What's that saying?
Yeah.
What's your comments on this, Emory?
Well, it's a form of genocide that's happening in this country against particularly black people and people of color, and it's always being justified. Nothing never happens. You get some words, but no really anything is done about it beyond that. And just always, so it's an institutional thing that's that in that reality. Yeah.
Yeah, because the country's founded on that genocide and slavery.
And
Steel.
that was
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, that was that goes back to the context of the Black Panther Party and self-defense. It was inspired by Robert Williams in that context as well.
Right on.
And, Brother Malcolm, but also when Brother Malcolm talked about by any means necessary, Hugh and Bobby and them analyzed that in the context of self-defense and observing different things that were taking place during the rebellions during that time, but also Robert Williams in relationship to self-defense and defending the community against the racist attacks in Monroe, North Carolina. And learning then about the Deacons for Self-Defense, the Deacons and all those other groups who were protecting the black community against the raids, against the Klan and the racists during that. So was a historical context that's relevant to now and what needs to be done, can be done at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point. For people that don't know, Robert Williams, coming out of Monroe, North Carolina, had been the head of the NAACP, ex-military veteran. And while he was engaged in the civil rights or Black freedom movement, decided to protect the Black community. And he had a grassroots following in the NAACP, and they armed. And then through various maneuvers, he had to leave North Carolina and went to Cuba and China, and then came back to the US. And he would put out a publication called The Crusader from abroad.
Yes.
And that would call for armed self-defense. And so, yeah, that's a very important brother there. And then, as you point out, Malcolm was always talking about the need for us to defend ourselves as a people. But he also, in the autobiography, there are missing chapters, and one of those chapters is on how Malcolm called for armed self-defense of any institutions we build. We got to be able to defend them. So, yeah, I think that's an important point you're making, brother. Genocide, and your point about they'll talk it and not talk it very much. In fact, it's one of the rare cases where the government had to come out and say this was a white terrorist attack, because Congress has not wanted to go after that, because the Republicans and a part of the Democrats don't want to go after their base. And some of them are in Congress now. They should be wearing Ku Klux Klan outfits, because they're as clannish as any of the right wing. So, yeah, that's a good point.
No.
Good point. So today what I want to do is to, first of all, have a chance to explore Brother Emory Douglas's contributions as both a revolutionary and a revolutionary artist. And by the way, it's a privilege to have a revolutionary on the show. Real privilege.
The spirit revolution. That's right. Yes.
And by the way, a nice revolutionary. They're going to prove something to you, that there are revolutionaries that can actually smile, be humble, and all this. This is embodied in Brother Emory Douglas, which he's, again, too humble to talk about. As I pointed out before, Emory was a minister of culture for the Black Panther Party all the way through the Black Panther Party. And I first met you in either 65 or 66. And I remember you, young brother, walking through the community, and you were carrying your art. Do you remember that?
Yes, that's the one I was going to City College of San Francisco. I had to believe, that's wrong. Had to be 64.
Okay.
Around 64, 64, around it,
Okay.
64, 65,
Okay. Yeah, I remember that. And I remember your artwork, and I liked you. So that was our first contact. And then later, I would see you in various venues as you became politically active. So in terms of your artistic work, what I'd like to do, first of all, is point out to people that Emory and I had a series of conversations. I called him and asked him, would he be willing to do a series on the Black Panther Party? He said yes. And so then I asked him, so how would you format this? And so the format we're going to be using, which today is on the launching of the Black Panther Party, was at the suggestion of Emory. And then the second part, which will be done on the 4th of June. That will be on after the launching of the party, what happens. And that's going to be going into a lot of the history of the Black Panther Party. And Emory's going to be given his perspective as somebody who was there. So that was the basis for that. And then at another point, we're going to do a thing where we can just have a show on Emory Douglas's art. And this is a book on Emory Douglas's art, Black Panther Revolutionary Art, Emory Douglas. And it shows his vast creativity. So part of what I want to do in this introduction is to also acknowledge your achievements, and for the audience, they can better appreciate what this revolutionary artist has done around the world. The first thing I wanted to do was read an introduction by Danny Glover on your art. Most people know who Danny Glover is. Those that don't, he's a great African American artist and had been a student at San Francisco State and took part in the San Francisco State strike and was a part of the Black arts movement. So this is what Danny Glover has to say about Emory Douglas. He said, when you think of Emory Douglas, you think about his warm and very gracious style. He is unassuming, very quiet, almost borderline shy. See that smile there? The smile comes first before any words. See there? He's proved it. It's hard to imagine that some of the images he was able to create became legendary and even iconic in some sense. I remember those images. Sam Napier, who was the circulation manager of the Black Panther Party and was murdered, um, and I used to eat breakfast all the time in a little restaurant on the corner of Ellis and Fillmore. Before the Panthers sold them, they would go and put them up on the walls in the Fillmore. They considered the community their gallery. I think that's a good way of describing your work.
Yes.
The community became the gallery for your work. In a sense, it's an appropriate analogy. The images were images of the community embraced. And I would say images of everyday Black people in struggle, which is your stuff. They were so right on, so appropriate for the struggle at hand at that time, that a sense of self-determination ensued from those images that Emory created. When I think about it, there was a sense of immediacy in Emory's art. Of course, we're talking about using art in the most fundamental way of bringing people to a certain place and bringing them there, also defining and legitimatizing the space they're in. It's really fascinating from the standpoint of looking at art, because it was only his individual art. It was a collective art. It was not only his individual art, it was a collective art. That's what art should be, collective. And Emory's art represented a kind of collective energy. And I think Emory's going to show that, because his part of his humility is based on the fact that he sees himself as a part of a struggle bigger than him. When I think about it, there was a sense of immediacy and so forth. I remember a rally at DeFermi Park, and the civil rights leader, Roy Wilkins, had come out to speak. This was in 1968. Oh my.
Yeah.
Oh, the Panther Party had captured the imagination of Black Americans, and Roy Wilkins, a stalwart of integration at that particular point in time, realized that his credibility was in question. At that rally, he and other people felt that they had a different expectation of themselves. I believe that Emory's art in itself elicited a lot of different emotions among people. For example, his early art work for the Black Panther Party, in some sense, defined policemen as pigs, and therefore the party newspaper had the graphic images of them as pigs. So true. When you think about the very brutal response of the police to that expression, it substantiated the image itself. Uh-huh. So when I think about those first images, I think on one hand, the characterization went along with the definition of a certain degree, but it was young people who were able to embrace those images in some sense. And once they embraced the images, then they had some level of credibility. And I think the credibility behind that was what I remember. That's very important there. Of course, when you begin to use the words off the pigs off the pig, they created another language. And the art is also itself supported the language that was created. So the language became the part of the discourse. Now, if you're a real, a policeman, what do you feel about that? That's the reaction of anger and hostility on one hand. And at the same time, how do you begin to question your role in the whole situation? If they question it at all. I
Yeah.
noticed some of them actually took on the term pig,
Yeah. And matter of fact, they even tried to clean it up, because for one point you had the San Francisco Police Department and the Oakland Police Department started called a Pig Bowl, a football game they did annually. But
Uh,
it still it didn't work.
uh,
You know?
anytime your
Yeah.
enemy starts to take on your own self
Yeah.
definitions of them, which is one of Huey P. Newton's definitions of power, then that's a sign that they are conceding to your power when they
Mhm.
accept your
Yeah.
definition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because your definitions are not going to be very positive, they're going to be
Yeah.
accurate.
Mhm.
So he goes on to conclude. Certainly, the art and images that Emory Douglas created played a significant role in that whole process, which in turn created a sense of empowerment and entitlement. We're all the better for it. And I would say, that's a beautiful statement and accurate. And that the walls of Black communities throughout the United States and different parts of the world were plastered with that revolutionary art. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
And that must have given people a real sense of empowerment. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, well, yes, because they seen themselves in the artwork as well.
Mhm.
Because there were the pig drawings, and that became a psychological victory in the context of seeing the pigs being defined and being humiliated in the context of the artwork itself, and that was a sense of psychological empowerment in the context of many people who had these fears,
Mhm.
reluctance to deal with that issue. But you're showing it through the art because it's reflecting the party's practice. When you talk about point number 7 of wanting to immediately end the police brutality and murder Black people, and the patrols and going on the patrols and what have you, that begins to show by example of dealing with confronting those challenges and obstacles that you're confronted with. Is Yeah. So I
Mhm.
think it had an impact in that context in many ways. How people embraced it, because it became not a me art but a we art. It was an art that was a reflection of the spirit and aspirations and desires. You could talk about the love, the pain, the suffering, all those things that people could see in the context of the art, because you what you're doing is interpreting life's examples of life's journey in the art that you hear, the expressions communicated on a daily basis, and you observe on a daily basis of the community and the people themselves and their
Mhm.
feelings.
Mhm.
And plus, not only that, through the programs you implement, you hear
Yeah.
things and other concerns and desires on a daily basis. Yeah.
Mhm. In a way, this reminds me of a statement that a friend of mine who's passed on um, made, um, Upesi M. Tambuzi, and she made the comment, for Black people, poetry is a necessity. And that is a profound statement, because that means the average Black person has a strong artistic sense.
Mhm.
And I would add to that, for Black people, beauty is a necessity.
Mhm.
And what you're saying is no greater beauty than for people to see their own image
Yes.
and reflected in a manly and womanly fashion in resistance, but
Mhm.
everyday Black folks,
Yes. Mhm.
who created this beauty.
Mhm.
So really
Mhm.
what you're doing is continuing that tradition of creating beauty where there's ugliness.
Mhm.
You got one of those pictures I saw where a sister is standing there very dignified, holding a big rat in her hand.
Mhm.
You know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
You know? black folks who have to pay more for their rent than white folks to rent it with rats.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, the dignity that's brought out of that, that's an expression of our people who have
Mhm.
this high level of dignity as it is. So I think that that's beautiful what you're saying. You know,
Mhm.
that it's a reflection of the people themselves, and the way you're stressing it
Mhm.
encourages people
Yes.
to
Mhm.
resist.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Mhm.
Uh, I just want to pay some respect to Emory here because this is something he's not going to do. His art is admired all over the world. And of course, he'll tell you it's an expression of a revolutionary movement and a revolutionary consciousness. So Emory has served as artist in residence around the world, collaborated with indigenous artists in the Americas, including the Zapatistas and the Mayans. People who are in revolt, especially, have identified with this art. And I was reading one of your comments that you also were inspired by a lot of the revolutionary art coming out of people of color in
Yes.
Vietnam and other places.
Yes. Yeah. Cuba. Yes.
Yeah, Cuba.
Mhm. Mhm. And
So,
also, it was African liberation art during that time. There
right,
used to be a lot of posters came out of Mozambique,
right,
what have you, during the Frelimo and what have you. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had the opportunity in Tanzania to interact with freedom fighters in Frelimo and in other groups. And then around African liberation support, we were doing mobilization of resources to send to those African liberation movements. So it was kind of like our movement was inspiring people around the world to resist, and their movements were inspiring us,
Mhm. Yeah.
and your art was at the key of that,
Mhm.
expressing uh, symbolically the motion of the Black Panther Party.
Mhm.
So Emory's works have appeared in various ways. He's exhibited his art, participated in artistic conferences all over the world, collaborated on mural art, which is really strong art, especially in Mexico, exhibited his art at the Smithsonian, and he's received the American Institute of Graphic Art Lifetime Achievement Medal in New York. Um, May 24th is Emory's birthday, and on May 24th, 2019, the city of San Francisco proclaimed May 24th, 2019 as Emory Douglas Day. Now, of course, Emory would find that ironic given his races as San Francisco. So we all know what those awards really mean.
Mhm.
In 2020, Emory collaborated with Spike Lee's graphic designer, a guy named Kenny Gravelis, and Emory Douglas created the PR poster for Spike Lee's film, The Bloods, that's been on Netflix for quite a while.
Yeah, I created one of the posters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just recent. 2021, Emory collaborated again with Kenny Gravelis to design a PR poster for the Warner Brothers film Judas and the Black Messiah, which is a film on the Black Panther Party, both the infiltration, the Judas, and Fred Hampton,
Mhm.
focused on Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
What do you think of that film?
Well, I think that if you talk about it from this context of a pamphlet, it may be you can't tell the whole story in 2 hours.
Right.
But I think in the context of people who are uninformed and young people, I think it opens up to avenue to begin to communicate with them and inform them and to give them, enlighten them about the reality of what COINTELPRO was really about. Yeah.
Mm.
Because Hollywood is about making money. And that's the bottom line, even though some of the youngsters who are dealing with the film and those who are in the film were inspired by the Panthers, there's limitations on what they're going to possibly have been able to project in the film itself. And so there's the limitations, but at the same time, for it to come to the point where it left it open for opportunity for those who were understood what COINTELPRO was about and the repression of it, and how it destroyed internal, exploited the limitations of the internal operations of organizations, what have you, to begin to communicate those things to these young people. So it can be a tool in that context.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the good old savage Federal Bureau of Ignorance,
Mm-hmm.
Bureau of Investigation.
Yes.
Investigation, my butt.
Mm-hmm.
Emory Douglas's artistic works have been displayed all over the world, including Australia and
New
specifically.
Zealand. Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
with the Maori in New Zealand.
right.
And then there were the Polynesian Panthers who became official chapter in 1971 in New Zealand.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know about the Polynesian Panthers.
Yes.
I knew about Panthers in different parts of the world. That's a new one for me.
Yeah. They came to the 50th year.
Okay.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, right on, right on.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about that is a lot of that interaction was with Aboriginal artists
Yes.
who had
Absolutely.
faced genocide
Mm-hmm.
at the hands of whites in Australia and
Mm-hmm.
neighboring countries
Mm-hmm.
in the South Pacific. And then his work has been displayed in Lisbon, Portugal, London. For people that don't know it, Nottingham is in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
The Netherlands, Denver, Colorado, a number of places in the United States, Glasgow, Argentina, Chiapas, Mexico, where the Zapatistas have staged a lot of their organizing. Um, Mexico City, Montreal, Quebec, Madrid, Spain, Auckland, New Zealand, Bogota, Colombia, Havana, Cuba, Rhode Island, the School of Design in Rhode Island, Sicily, and many universities in the United States. That's just to name a few. I'm saying that because you need to know that. You understand? And you need to know that this is a revolutionary artist here of great excellence. He's master in many dimensions of art, but it's his revolutionary art that has particularly inspired the world. Now, I think this is also, again, proof positive of a point that I keep making, that African American culture is the culture of popular choice of the United States and the world,
Mm-hmm.
and all forms of it. But the highest form is its artistic expression. And what is rare to find in the world for any people is the revolutionary artistic expression.
Mm-hmm.
And so, brother, your work is not only beautiful, it's revolutionary, and it inspires people to throw off oppression around the world. And in the images they see of everyday Black people here, they see themselves too globally,
Mm-hmm.
just as you've seen
Yeah.
that in the art that has come from Asia, Africa, Latin
Mm-hmm.
America, the Caribbean, the South
Mm-hmm.
Pacific, and Europe. So this is to show respect for the brother. This is a activist. He was involved in most phases of the Black Panther Party action, but at the same time was putting the beauty out there to wake our people up. Emory, can you give people some background on yourself, where you were born,
Mm-hmm.
your mother,
Yeah.
influence of the community you were raised in on you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My mom was a single parent. I had asthma as a kid, and the doctors thought my mother had a sister who lived in San Francisco, and they thought that the weather might be better if we came to San Francisco. So we came to San Francisco in 1951. Eventually, I grew out of asthma, but we stayed with first with my mother, had a extended family sister. We stayed for her a couple of days. Then we went out there in Double Rock. It's where the first 49ers used to play football out there. That was all Double Rock housing project. And they went all the way up into that industrial area, what they then gentrified and the whole bit. All those used to be housing projects. And so I lived there and in Fillmore as well. Then when my mama got a house in Fillmore, we lived in one of the small, narrow streets, the alleys. A lot of the people who couldn't afford sometimes to live on the main streets, then you could get an affordable something housing in the narrow alleys. But this was blocked. This is the first house that we lived at was owned by a Black woman named Miss Donnelly. And so it was a good relationship there, even though, you had shared bathroom, didn't have any ice, didn't have even a refrigerator, an ice box, didn't even have an ice box, put ice in then. Just to put the food in little they call them square boxes, which you put in the window with a screen on it, and you put the cool food in there to try to keep it fresh. And you half out the window, half inside the house, and the window closes down on it to stabilize it. So we had that, and the kitchen became my sleeping area in the evening, and my mom and her boyfriend then would have the living room, which was where we had 2 rooms during that time. And so that was the initial bringing up in San Francisco. Lived around many places in San Francisco, all over. Even moved to Chinatown at one time for about 9-6 months because it was cheaper during that time. Lived over on where the ballpark is, the San Francisco Giants ballpark, and the basketball stadium is now Warriors basketball. All that used to be kind of like Skid Row because it was less used to live there because it was less costly as for rent and what have you. So we lived all over San Francisco. Went to the public schools here in San Francisco, but primarily lived in the Fillmore district. And growing up in the Fillmore district as a youngster, about 1955, my mom was legally blind, but she could see something. And they had these concession stands for the handicapped that were in the public buildings and spaces and state buildings. And she was able to get the job at the juvenile hall, working in the cafeteria with the lady who ran that cafeteria, who was also blind. That's where you feed the probation officers and families is coming in to see the youngsters who are incarcerated. And so she knew a lot of people, young people, families, because when they would come out there and some of them come to see their kids didn't have money, she would give them food and what have you. So she knew a lot of people in the community that she would see all the time when I would take her shopping and what have you. But growing up in Fillmore, living in the Fillmore district, I remember one time about 8th grade in the Fillmore district, they had a curfew for young blacks my age. And that if we had to wear dog tags with our name and our age on it. And if we were caught out after curfew hours, they could catch us, then they would take us to juvenile. So that was on the books for quite a while. I remember observing, and so my life's journey, understanding the context and hearing the stories from my extended family and family when they would get together and they'd be talking, and someone was in the military and they would talk about the racism that they were confronted with in the service and all those kinds of things that's going on. And then how you didn't work getting the equal treatment in the classrooms. You could sense it and feel it when you were in grade school with the teachers and what have you. So all of those things played. And then looking at the TV, and you maybe had it for 2 or 3 hours, whatnot, and then you would. Nat King Cole had a preview program, which was on 15, 20 minutes. The other shows were on for an hour. So you just those kinds of discussions about that kind of racism and existing. And going forward, and going to with my auntie to the South, when I was about 10 years old, going to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we catch the bus, the Greyhound bus, and we ride, get off in Oklahoma City at the bus station. She takes my hand, and we go into the station. She say, "Baby, we have to sit in here. You can't use the bathroom out here. You got to use the bathroom in here." And it said for colors only, and the bathroom said for colors. And so that was my first contact and relationship on the reality going to the South in that manner. I remember too. I used to watch the baseball games from Cuba that day. They used to come on all on the weekend, and you would see all the players from all over Cuba and South America playing baseball. Then that night, the only thing you could get on TV after hours was the Follies and the Vegas kind of atmosphere, performances and all that. And then I remember in 1959, it was Edward R. Murrow. I remember that. And all of a sudden, they said that something was happening. And I didn't know it then, but that was the Cuban Revolution.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting because
yeah.
I was at San Francisco State at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in a debate class, and the debate was on the Cuban Revolution. I wasn't very radical, but I identified with the Cuban Revolution, and I won the debate. And then after I won the debate, I challenged the debate teacher to a debate, and he wouldn't debate.
Mm-hmm.
But I just knew there was something going on that island that looked good.
Yeah.
Black people were standing up.
Yeah.
You know?
That's why I would like to always watch the basketball, the baseball game. You saw the Black Latin players. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Film auditorium. Did you, as a kid, did that have any impact on you?
Oh yeah. It was a brother named Sullivan who ran the film auditorium, and Bill Graham, when he became famous, worked for him. And Bill Graham was given the opportunity to do some shows there when business when things were going slow. And it was there after when Sullivan got murdered, coming back from promoting the show in LA because he was a promoter. Then that's when Bill Graham took it over, and it became the Bill Graham Enterprise. But the film auditorium, I used to go there when the black entertainers could not stay downtown. They could only stay in Fillmore, or they stayed at family house or what have you. And there used to be a hotel between Fillmore and Webster on O'Farrell, I think it's O'Farrell or Ellis Street. That's where all the entertainers would be. Mm-hmm. And then they had a record shop. I think it was Melrose Record Shop. It used to be on Fillmore, around Eddie in that area on Fillmore. Right. And you could see them walking down there to do live interviews at the record shop from time to whenever they were in town. I remember I used to go there when Little Anthony and the Imperials and Frankie Lyman went back in those days.
Yeah, I used to go with James Brown. Mm-hmm. Hey, please, please, please get up on his knees and then get up. And I do the same thing when I was in Harlem at the Apollo Theater. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the film auditorium was the place where you're going to get some real soul music. And then later, the Nation of Islam's office would be on that same block.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Malcolm would come through there regularly. And then they had a restaurant a few blocks down where he'd get his coffee and stuff.
Yeah, and they had all the jazz performing clubs, Bop City and all the other on Sutter and on Post and up and down Fillmore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wesley Johnson, who owned two of those nightclubs. Would always walk down the street with a 10-gallon hat on, with cowboy boots on, cleaner than clean. You know? That was a real black community, and that supported the San Francisco freedom movement from 60 to 66. Literally, those businesses and the various clubs and stuff, they provided support for that movement. And in fact, during that period, that was a militant heartbeat of the black community in the Bay Area. It would then shift to Oakland with the Black Panther Party. So, the black community was a rich community to live in.
Yeah, you had the theaters, you had the barbecue joints, all those things. Yeah, you had a lively black community because when I lived on Linden Street down by Buchanan and Laguna, in the alley, you had black folks living in the alley there, but there was still predominantly white folks. And I remember when I ventured up and went up on Fillmore, and that was the first time I seen that many black folks. It's like, it was a whole other world.
Oh yeah. They called it the Harlem of the West. So that background's important. And by the way, your comment that you had to sleep in the kitchen, that's same comment that Huey had. He and his brother had to
Mm-hmm.
sleep in the kitchen because they
Mm-hmm.
had 9 children in their family, and then the mother and father, 11.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they were lucky to have any place in their house where they could find
Yeah.
where they could lay out and
Yeah.
lay down. Imagine
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah. That's kitchen with the roaches.
Yeah. Or rats in some
That's
cases,
right. That's
you know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Depending on where you were living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and these were, for the most part, blacks who had moved from the South into the West Coast as they did in other parts of the country during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
You all moved from Michigan, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them had come directly from the South and were packed into houses, like sardines,
Mm-hmm. Now,
Um, go ahead.
there was a couple other things. There was 2 things. I remember as a youngster, I would see, I didn't know who they were. I was be looking at TV. If the news came on, these 2 black men, anytime they came to town at different times, it just happened I'd be looking at TV, and the reporters would always be interviewing them. And I was intrigued because come to find out that was W.E. Du Bois and Paul Robeson.
Wow.
Because I remember one time W. Du Bois had came because I lived around the corner from where his office was that had been firebombed.
Mm.
His socialist office, and he came out here for that because I remember because all the fire department, all of them, you hear all that noise, and then was on TV about it being bombed. And then a couple of days later, he was out there and he was on the news, And then yeah. And then I recall when I started working at Sunday Porter, I seen the pictures with Dr. Douglas with meeting with Paul Robeson and W. Du Bois from back historical context. And then I recall I used to watch I remember watching the 19 I think it was 1964 Democratic Convention when Fannie Lou Hamer and the delegation were refused to be seated at the Democratic Convention because it was black.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All those kinds of things were informing and enlightening. Then the rebellions taking place, and they're always being justified, just like the murders and genocide continues today in relationship to what's recently happened and been happening, and so, that all played a role in wanting to, when the Black Conscious movement comes about, he wanted to contribute, and particularly in the Black Arts movement, becoming aware historical contexts of figures and those personalities in the movement. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. A lot of people wouldn't know who Carlton Goodlett was. He's a Bay Area figure.
Mm-hmm.
Carlton Goodlett was a radical black person. He had been in charge of the NAACP in the 50s when Paul Robeson, who's the great artist, athlete, performer, intellectual, revolutionary, had been denied the use of his passport and was under persecution by the House Un-American Activities Committee. He's one of the great giants of our race. Then Carlton Goodlett was designated as the person that could travel around the world speaking on behalf of Paul Robeson.
Mm-hmm.
And Goodlett himself was an interesting figure because he was a multimillionaire. He had a PhD in psychology from UC Berkeley, and he had a medical degree from Meharry College, where he also sat on the board of directors. So he was a socialist capitalist. He had socialist orientation, but he also had some money. But he also was somebody who danced to his own tune. Nobody told Goodlett what to do. He was a major supporter of the San Francisco Freedom Movement. And he was a major supporter of any movements that stood up for black folks, including putting pressure on Third Baptist Church that he was a part of to do political work to see that black political prisoners were freed.
Yeah. And we had a good relationship because they used to always call us from time to time. We were having problems and they needed somebody to help them on the paper. And I would be able to work it out, somebody from my country to go over and help them on the paper. And they always used to write support of the politics of the Black Panther Party. But also one thing Dr. Goodlett did is when there was almost a confrontation at our office on Fillmore. and one of the Panthers came back in, and all of a sudden, there was police out there. We had to close it down, and we were trying to get out the back to get somebody to call. We went out to the back, and they were all out there, and it was about ready to go off. And so we got on the phone, called in the press, got in touch with Doc. Doc and them came, stood in front of the office. And DC was down, Cox was there then. And he was the one liaison between Doc and what was going on outside. And finally, if we were called Doc and Fleming at that time, it might have been, we might have been ancestors, you know. Yeah, during that time. Yeah. The other thing is, a lot of people don't know is that when Paul Robeson was sick, the Panthers in Philadelphia took care of him.
Right on.
That just came to mind. I just thought about that. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the real giants that we produced. Superman. Superman.
Yeah.
Whole government came down on his head, but he was about the freedom of Black people and all oppressed people all over the world. I mean, a beautiful man, and truly a Superman. Superman would get his butt kicked if he was facing Paul Robeson. He wouldn't have to fly. Just put some of those big fists in his face. You know what I mean? Now, at the time that I met you, you were carrying your art around in the community, 64. That would have been the time where the San Francisco Freedom Movement was at its peak. We were putting 10,000 people in the streets, taking on the major employers in San Francisco. Now, a little later, you get involved with the Black Arts Movement. How did the Black Arts Movement influence your art and your consciousness? And what was your contribution to it? What were some of the artists that influenced you?
Well, there was a lot of different artists that were in the Black Arts Movement. It was a broad movement, and I'm just, you know, I'm new kid, youngster on the block, trying to fit in, trying to learn and make a contribution, and so I got involved with it. And there was, I can't think of names, but there were several. One was Charles Bible, who was one of the artists who used to do all the portraits of Brother Malcolm. And he lived downstairs from where I lived at. And I used to go down and ask him how his process was. He explained that to me, how he would do all the manufacturing of multiples at the time of the famed photo of Malcolm. Yeah, but as a kid, I think the inspiration came from my auntie, who used to get this calendar of this Black artist every year from an insurance company, and she would pay her insurance, and then they were bringing this, and I used to be all of the artwork that I seen on it, and coming to find out that was Charles White. You know, but yeah, so that had to have a great influence on me. Just seeing that art as a youngster. Yeah. But in the Black Arts Movement, becoming conscious, becoming connected, and having the opportunity to meet Emory Baraka then, and being around him, and being around, then you have the you know, the whole Black Power conscious movement, defining who we are, as opposed to being the colonial name Negro, beginning to sign African, African-American, all those things coming into play, and debates and discussions going on. Changing I went to San Francisco City College. You had a brother named Roland Young, who was a jazz DJ on the radio station, who went there, who was beginning to change the name from the Negro Student Association, Afro-Americans, Black Students Union Association, and I got involved with that at City College of San Francisco. And so all that played into my consciousness. All the rebellions was going on during that time, still all over the country. So all those dynamics were a part of my learning curve.
Yeah, what you're describing there is like the progression of what was the Black Freedom Movement coming out of the South, and then it spreads into the North, and then that morphs into the Black Consciousness Movement, and that morphs into Black Power, and all of that is the awakening coming out of people who are engaged in struggle, and Malcolm's playing a part in that, but the main drive for that is coming from the battles people are having against the system. In the
Mm-hmm.
South, against segregation, and the fight for the right to vote. In the North,
Mm-hmm.
the various struggles we were having, and particularly in the San Francisco freedom movement. Now, the Black Arts movement at that time, they were operating out of a place called the Black House, and Amiri
Mm-hmm.
Baraka and others were doing plays and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Want to
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that?
yeah. They had prior to the Black House, though. I think they had the storefronts, Marvin, and I was working with Brother Marvin X and the whole collective of perform brothers and sisters who had doing the performances together. And I was doing the announcements and flyers for the different events and things that were taking place during that time. Then when the Black House came about, that's when you used to have all the different well-known poets from around the Bay Area, and including Sonia Sanchez, Ed Bullins, and others would come through there all the time when they were in town, and and there were a whole lot of cultural discussions, debates, and going on as well in that context. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at that time, the Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, then Leroy Jones, and Askia Muhammad Toure and them, they were coming through because at that point, the BSU, Black Students Union, through the experimental college, had brought them in to teach some courses.
Mm-hmm.
That experimental college had come to birth through the San Francisco Freedom Movement, the demonstrations we had at the Sheraton Palace Hotel. A number of students who were arrested while in jail came up with the idea of the experimental college. White students ended up running that for a number of years. And then when the BSU got themselves together in the 60s, around 65, 66, they took that over. And that battle that they had at City College over Negro versus Black,
Mm-hmm.
state, they had decided to define themselves as Black and call their association not the Negro Students Association, but the Black Students Union.
Mm-hmm.
So then they come out for that. Now, Sonia told me that for the first year, they worked out at state for no pay. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
They had a trip. You hear
Mm.
me? Ain't that a trip?
Yeah.
Some of your best poets and artists in
Mm-hmm.
the world. And then after that, they hired them for another year. But
Mm-hmm.
then that became the forerunner for the strike, because without that, you wouldn't have had the kind of momentum going and the consciousness raising that you needed for that strike to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somewhere in this, um, we'll get into the formation of the Black Panther Party, but Betty Shabazz is supposed to come to San Francisco and speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Panthers, right after they were formed, were asked to play a role in that. Could you
Mm-hmm.
discuss that?
Yeah. Well, how my involvement got in, put it in context, it was when I was at City College of San Francisco. And during that time, there was a group of us trying to figure out, brothers and sisters who were working together, trying to figure out what we could do as a collective. And one of those was Hank Jones, one of the brothers who was a part of the SF8 brothers who were 40 years later. They come after them from something that they did not do, so Hank Jones was the one. He was out of San Francisco State, but I used to go out there all the time because that's where all the action was. And he knew of my art as well in the Black Arts movement. So he contacted me and said they were looking for somebody to do the poster for the event for Sister Betty Shabazz. And they wanted me to come to the next meeting to see if, and I went and I agreed that I would do the poster. And they mentioned that it was the brothers who would be coming over to the next meeting, and they would let them know if they were going to do the security or not. And when they came over to the next meeting, that was Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and I think little Bobby Hutton, and a few of the first cadre of Panthers. And it was after that meeting, I asked them, I knew that's what I wanted to be a part of, so I asked them how could I join. And they had come business cards, and they gave me the business card. And thereafter, I contacted Huey, I didn't have a car then, so I used to catch the bus over to his house when he was living up on Telegraph Avenue and connected with Huey. And then he would show me around in the neighborhood. It went by Bobby Seale's house thereafter. And that was my first involvement in transitioning into the Black Panther Party from being involved with the Black Arts Movement. And that was late January, early February of 1966, 67, excuse me. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's right after that that Betty comes to.
Well, what happened is that there was the Black Panther Party of Northern California and a collective of community folks who were putting the event on.
Mhm.
And what happened, they wrote a letter and did not get any response from her. And then they were concerned. So it may have been Marvin or somebody who said, well, it was a brother who just got out of prison who can write the letter, who was a follower of Malcolm. And we'll see if he would agree to write the letter. And they were going to go up to his house. And that, they asked me to go along, and I went along. And that was Eldridge Cleaver. He agreed to write the letter. And after he wrote the letter to her, that's when she agreed to come. So the first so can you imagine Huey and Cadre going to the airport to meet her, going through the airport armed, going to the airplane and escorting her off the plane. He can never do that. I remember saying that. They don't show that no more. I remember saying that. Yeah. And the first place she wanted to go, because Eldridge Cleaver was a follower of Malcolm, and she wanted to go to Ramparts magazine to meet him, because that was in Ramparts magazine, was in North Beach at the time, and that's where Eldridge worked. And so straight from the airport, they went to North Beach, and that was how Eldridge connected with Huey and them, because they knew of him as a writer in prison, but they had no way of getting in contact with him. And they had the whole vision of starting the newspaper and looking for somebody to write for the people, what they liked to style, I guess, or what have you. And that's how they connected with him, because they had no other way. And I remember when we were sitting down sometimes talking, they would say, yeah, we were always trying to contact, but we had no way of getting into touch with you. So it just so happens it worked out that way. And it was thereafter that they began to communicate with him about working on the paper itself as the editor.
Yeah, at the same time, Eldridge came to my house with Marvin X. And, Marvin plays a big part. Marvin X is a poet, part of the Black Arts Movement, still alive. And Eldridge had come to my house to see if I would endorse that rally. And I had just had a rally in the Hunters Point where Betty would speak, and I had been attacked by 18 gangsters coming out of Adam Rogers' gang. And he was working with the mayor of San Francisco at that point, trying to see that no militant influence got out into Hunters Point.
That was Alioto, yeah.
Alioto.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a launching rally for what became the Pan-African People's Organization 2 weeks earlier. We had about 500 people out there. And then we had a fundraiser the following week. And that's when we were attacked. And so at the time that Eldridge comes to my house, I've got a cast on one arm. This finger was permanently broken. I mean, I laid out a whole lot of people. There's 18 coming after us, So he came to ask for the endorsement, and I told him, yeah. Now, the reason he came is that his attorney, Beverly Axelrod, had been the attorney for the Congress of Racial Equality. She was a Jewish American, good lawyer. She got him out of prison. He dedicated Soul on Ice, his best-selling book, to her, So she had told him about me, and so I'd let him meet at our headquarters. So he had been holding meetings with the Socialist Workers Party. He had been meeting with various groups. He had been going on a speaking tour as he wrote for Ramparts. Ramparts was a radical left-wing magazine that put out some very good research opposing imperialism and a whole lot of other things. And so he would meet in the upstairs of our office to get support from different people. So when he came to the house, I said, yeah, I would support that rally, but I also was watching him. And I said, observing your behavior, because he hadn't joined the Panthers yet.
Mhm.
I said, it looks like your position is that whites should be introduced back into the Black community as equals. And he was then forging relationships with different groups that would later become the Hippies for Huey and the various other Peace and Freedom Party different groups. And I said, it's all right for white people to be doing work in support of Black people in their own community, but bringing them back to our community as equals, that ain't no good. And so Eldridge would always go, if you criticized him, he usually wouldn't say anything. And at that time, he had a big pot belly because at times he would be in good shape. And then at times, that weight would catch up with him. So then after that, we do a ride because I need a ride. I didn't have a car. I'm staying with my father. And so we're driving down Fillmore because I had a meeting to go to. So while we're driving down, I'm asking Eldridge some key questions. And these questions were, what had you read? And I had a laundry list of books. Because if you've been in prison and you're coming out and you're going to make a radical contribution to Black people, there's got to be some stuff in your head. So I wanted to know what was in his head. So I started listing books, Frantz Fanon, a whole bunch. It was 15 or 20. He hadn't read any of them, not a single one. You know what I mean? And that told me right away, in addition to what I had seen, though he was a good writer and a good speaker, that there was some serious shortcomings there. And, I think that would play out later because he would play a good role in a certain way. We'll get into part two in other ways in part two, but that alerted me and got me concerned, real concerned. And then I sent a brother who had worked with me in C.O.R.E. His name was Jogan Calvis, later Dengani. So I sent him to the rally where Betty spoke. And I'm just going to say that I've asked many people who were at that rally, did you attend that rally?
I'm not sure which one it is. I don't think so.
Betty Shabazz's rally when she came out and spoke in Hunters Point.
I may have. Yes, I think I did. Yes.
Yeah. Because I've asked people, do they remember what she said? Nobody remembers. Well, the brother that I sent, Jogan Calvis Dengani, later, he did. And he gave me a report. And I'm just going to say, I can't tell you the key thing she said because when I revive my book on Malcolm, it's going to be in there. You know what I mean? But I'm going to tell you something. It ain't been, no one else has revealed that. And I think she only said it once. And she felt like she was empowered to say it because she had all these armed Panthers around her. So she felt empowered. But after that, she never said it again. So wait for my book to come out to find out what she said. I ain't telling you. You know what I mean? But I'm going to tell you it was something very, very serious. Now, you've explained how you got hooked up with the Black Panther Party. When it comes to Huey, what was Huey like as a person? And particularly in your interactions with him in the early period of the Black Panther Party, and any other influences that you knew that impacted on Huey, whether family, community, any people, whatever.
Well, I'm in awe. They years ahead of me in what their vision and thinking and their insights and level intellectual insight and what have you. When I come on, so I'm new youngster on the block in that sense. But Huey then was more of a shy person. Of course, if he felt he's going to be attacked, then he would attack first, in that sense. But other than that, he was shy. He did, he was, he was a big natural. He didn't like to comb it and all that kind of stuff during the time. He was the picture of him in the wicker chair. He was not, he did not want to take that picture. He was now reluctant to take it. But he was encouraged by Eldridge and Bobby to go forward and to take it, which Eldridge was the one who orchestrated that picture, because at the house where he was living, I think his lawyer's house, the wicker chair was there, and the whole, all those elements that were a part of the photograph were there. And I think he would finally agreed to take it. When I knew when I was going there, when we initially was first start working on the paper, that was where we first started to work on the paper. And they went there and they were setting it up, the scene. And Huey was kind of still reluctant, but he was going along with it, you know, during that time, that photograph. But yeah, well, Huey he had a great relationship. He always said with his Melvin Newton was the one that I seen him to be communicating with, at least politically. He may have, all his other brothers, he communicated with them all the time when they would come around. But it was Melvin who was the one who was working closely with Huey, and he, I guess, debating the discussions and connecting him with other intellectuals that he was in discussion with, and other folks who were in that context, just have the debates and discussions with. Melvin Newton was the primary focus of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Huey obviously had a brilliant mind and was a good thinker. What was your view of that in terms of his intellect?
Well, yeah, he was a good thinker, but it was in a way that comrades had to get still the spirit of it,
Mm-hmm.
but it still wasn't like you could understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't on the grassroots. So it became a thing, and out of that kind, what happened was that that first office that Huey and Bobby had, that they used to, with that first cadre, when they began to do the patrols, they would go in there and do the technical equipment training and all those things, and had a few community political education classes. And that's where the first interview was done. The Eldridge set up for the Examiner or the San Francisco Examiner or McCall, one of the papers, to do the interview. And I recall we went over there that day, and after the interview, they were showing around. It's where that bakery is, and on there on MLK, but that's where it was. But that whole thing is different structure now. And what happened is that we're in there communicating. In that first cadre, Bobby and them came in, and Hugh started talking to them about responsibilities that they didn't take care of with the technical equipment and stuff, cleaning it up and doing the right thing. And as 15, 16-year-old youngsters, they were sulking and what have you. And then so at that point, they were suspended for a week or two because of that, not taking care of their responsibility. And after they left, Huey was talking with Bobby. He said, Bobby, you're going to have to be the one to talk with the young brothers and sisters, because if I get into it, we'll be getting into a tussle back and forth. And from that day on, Bobby was the one. And Bobby was the one could communicate and break it down to whoever child could understand it. Mm-hmm. Whatever Huey communicated, it was like he could break it down to the comrades so they could. Because yeah, comrades were on different levels. We weren't all on that same level. You come in because you want to make the contribution, but you ain't coming in because you're on that same level of consciousness. So you had to break it down in a way that so everybody could at least get the essence or gist of what was the reality of what was being said. It needs to be done. And Bobby was able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that came about, because Bobby said, he would say, Bobby, if I deal with the youngsters, you know, I mess things up in that sense. So he understood his limitations in that context.
Yeah, that's an important thing that you're only going to get from somebody who's there and sees the interaction, because Bobby was a good public speaker. Mm-hmm. And he also had some ordinary qualities. He was a comedian at one point and had a little family background, so people could relate to that. Mm-hmm. He was more the street guy, you know what I mean? In fact, his reputation was he didn't just fight, he fought the toughest guys. He was a little guy, little compared to some of them. And then he said one of his problems was when he was growing up, his family members would say, "You're so pretty, you should have been a girl." And of course, you know, like that.
Mhm.
And then Huey P. Newton, it would get to be P.E. So he'd have to fight over that. So, you know, Huey had that kind of thing. He had the street creds, but yeah, some of those other things, Bobby was better at that. That's a good point. And it's a good thing to recognize your strengths and limitations because we all got them.
Yes.
Now, one of the things I wanted to do was to really talk about, and this comes from Huey, the influence of family. Now, you've mentioned Melvin Newton. Melvin's big influence was around education. Melvin was a good student, and that's what would inspire Huey ultimately to get his reading together, Melvin. But he talks about his family because they had 9 children, and he was the youngest. And that means something too, if you know anything about families. You know, so the first thing is his father and mother came out of the South, and his father was like as many black men as could. Saw to it that his wife never worked for white people. So that's the first thing. And that was to protect her from anything that might happen, from rape or anything else. And so, and as that family grew, that meant 9 children's mouths to feed, a total of 11. So his father usually worked 3 jobs, hardly ever at home. And his mother was a very important influence on him. And he makes the point, his mother and father had a good relationship, They loved each other and whatnot. But it was hard. And one of the things that really bothered Huey was how hard his father worked and how he was always in debt, you know, which was typical of the situation of black people. But the key thing that Huey stressed was the 2 biggest influences on his life was his father and then Melvin, which was the second youngest brother. And the key thing about the father was this: if there was a problem in school, for example, it was the father that always went down. If the kids were right, he stood up for them. If they were wrong, he wasn't on their side. That was the first thing. He was even-handed and he was fair. His father was a good fighter, but he never taught them how to fight. What he taught them was not to back down. Told them that if you got to fight, stand up, because his father was a fighter. And I don't know exactly why he didn't teach his kids how to fight. My mother wouldn't let my father do that because my father and his were very much alike. When I'm looking at these 2 fathers, I said, oh, he was blessed. Huey was blessed with a good family. Huey made the point that the greatest gift that he received from his father was a strong, I'm quoting him, was a strong sense of pride and self-respect. Strong sense of pride and self-respect. Now, Huey made this point that his father was like most black men, Southern black men in this case, who were men, you know, who you really couldn't push around. But the difference between his father, and I'd say the same was true of my father, he was among the rare cohort of black men in the South who showed that fearlessness to whites, because most black men who had it didn't show it, because to show it was a lynching offense. Just to be black, you could get lynched. But his father never put up with any mess from whites. There's one example where he had stopped, he was in the South, and him and his friend were laughing and talking, and it was right across the street, a white woman was sitting on the porch. And then all of a sudden, the white man comes out with an axe and comes after him. So the guy driving the car, it's not his father, drives away. And his father got mad. He said, "Why'd you drive away? Stop that car." He stopped the car. The father goes out. He ain't got anything but his fist to defend himself, and runs up to the white boy and says, "What you got that axe for?" Meaning that if the boy uses it, he's going to take it from him. And the white boy says, Oh, I got to look tough to my wife. Oh, you know what I mean? So what Huey said was that the most important gift that he got from his father was that even though he faced death, he stood on his manhood and that he gave the family a legacy. And that legacy was a legacy of freedom. His father gave him that legacy of freedom. And it reminded me of my father, which I've talked about on this show before, who had that same kind of spirit. And so when you see Huey's fighting spirit and the courage, in part, that comes out of his father. And Huey, he was named after Huey Long, who was the governor of Louisiana, who was racist, but did a lot of good things for poor people, like at Poor People's Hospital, a whole number of other things. So that was another thing. So that was a key thing. But then Huey also came to question the value of work in this system. If you're going to work and all you have is debt, you know what I mean? Huey questioned that. So that was a part of it. So that was key. Huey was also a product of the Oakland public school system. You got any ideas about Huey's views on the effect of the Oakland school system on him?
Well, I think that was one of the reasons why we started the school, our alternative school, when it came about, the opportunity came about, called Oakland Community School, which was in far east Oakland, around 63rd Street, in about I think about 1971, 72, somewhere around in there, or maybe a bit a little later. We started the school, yeah. And so that was, because he always said was about teaching our kids not what to think, but how to think. Yeah, that was important and part of the process of developing the intellectual abilities of the young people, and always having to question things in relation. Because before that, we had the liberation schools. And the kids were, because we all had always been teaching the kids how to think and analyze things. They were questioning stuff in school, and they were getting suspended for that. You see? So that was one of the reasons why we also had to begin to develop the alternative school, our school. Yeah, and it was developed with those professionals who had those administrative skills. You had come in and talk. You had talk to help to set up how the curriculum, and all those things. You had people come in. For one sister who came in, did about a couple of months of classes a week with those who were going to be the teachers in the class, teaching in the class. Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah. Huey's comments about the public school itself was the same comments I made. He didn't get a single solitary thing from the public schools.
Yeah.
In my case, my mother had taught us, all of us, to my brother and sister and me, how to read and write and everything. We went into school, we were at third grade level, But in Huey's case, at 12th grade, Huey couldn't read, And the main reason was the teachers were beating them down every day, like they were doing with most Black kids in the public schools, calling them dumb, and then putting him up and asking him to write something on the blackboard and telling him he knew he couldn't write it. And actually, Huey couldn't read, but he knew how to spell some of those words. And he would freeze up and then get told that he wasn't college material. At one point, they had tested him at 70, which is real low. You know what I mean? And so telling him he was dumb. Now, that's the good thing that they did, because he had the rebel in him. So when they told him that, he was saying, oh, no, I can do it. And then he taught himself how to read. And in 12th grade, it wasn't until 12th grade that he learned how to read. And so these were like formative things. And then he had the Black Sambo experience. Did you have the Black Sambo experience in school?
Well, if you're talking in the context, how you're talking about it, what context?
Well, in this context, it was the same I had, where that's an assignment, where you get an assignment in school on Black Sambo. And in
Oh
my
no, I didn't.
case, yeah, I was the only Black kid in the class, but
Mhm.
Huey was among a few. But the point is, in both cases, it was about demeaning
Mhm.
you. You know what I mean? Now,
Mhm.
Huey had a real profound interpretation of Black Sambo. Mine was just simply somebody who's chopping watermelon, who's got this exaggerated look, and that is supposed to be Black people. You know what I mean? But the point is that was designed to drum in your head a sense that you were less than everybody else. So those were his experiences with the public school system. But what Huey said about it was that the main thing that he got from the public schools was to learn how to resist, how to fight.
Mhm.
Just about every fight he was having, whether it was resisting the teachers or on the playroom, or in the community, was around that. And he said it was in that resistance that I was becoming a revolutionary. Now, I would say at the first stage, a confused revolutionary, but
Mhm.
one that was resisting authority. And so that was his thing. And so that was the public school system. And that's what's still happening today. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Black kids getting crushed in every possible way. And now with privatization of public schools, which in Oakland, a good part of the public schools are privatized, then the money's going into the pockets of the rich and less money even that's coming out of the pockets of
Mhm.
everyday Black people are going into education. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
kids are even getting a worse education than they got before, and then finding themselves in prison or in the military or whatever. So Huey was speaking to that. Um, Now, talk about the role of the Afro American Association, because these are like formative influences on Huey, both positive and negative. Um, what was, as you know it, what was some of the influence of the Afro American Association?
Well, I recall when his name was Don Ward, and then he had the radio show, the talk show,
Mhm.
and it was about buying black and black consciousness and black pride, what have
Donald
you.
Warden, you're talking
Yeah,
about Donald.
Don Ward. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that was what I got, was that my distance connection was through the radio more so than Huey's, which was more direct, and Huey and Bobby, it was more direct because they were in Oakland and at the time, and this was pre Black Panther Party as well, I believe. You know, their linked connection, associations or discussions or debates or how it was linked with him at that time. But mine was basically hearing him on the radio.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've discussed briefly on one of the shows a little bit about the Afro American Association. It was an association formed at UC Berkeley by a guy named Donald Warden, later named El Mansour. And it was a study group, basically. It was a group of Blacks who came together and did a lot of reading. And it came about through a series of debates held at UC Berkeley. And a guy named Herman Blake, who helped Huey in
Yes.
the writing of this book, Revolutionary Suicide,
Mhm.
which is an excellent book on Huey Newton, Black Panther Party. Excellent book. And Herman Blake had been in charge of the NAACP at UC Berkeley. And so he had invited Malcolm X to speak. And so the administration said he couldn't speak on campus because that was a violation of church and state. Billy Graham could speak, but not Malcolm. So a lot of the faculty and students rose up against that because they saw it as a violation of academic freedom. So they ended up having the speaking engagement off campus at the YMCA. Malcolm came and spoke and had a real effect on the students. So then after that, Donald Worden, later El Mansour, decides to take advantage of that, and he calls Herman Blake out, who's head of the NAACP on campus, for a debate. And so he takes the black nationalist position, basically arguing Donald Worden, raising the question of what would Oakland be like if it was facing a movement like you had in the South. And basically he argued that Oakland was in the same position. It was in a segregated racist system. He ended up winning the debate. After that, then the Afro-American Association is formed on campus as a study group. And the sister, Kamala Harris, who's vice president, her mother and father are among the first to join. And Huey is also one of the first to join. And what Kamala Harris's mother remembers is that the first reading assignment that Huey got, he came in unprepared. And so the people at UC Berkeley, at the Afro-American Association, jacked him up. And he came in prepared after that, and so that's the first thing I remember about Huey's thing. But the key thing about the Afro-American Association is that it trained a whole bunch of intellectual heavyweights in the Bay Area. This was the positive contribution of Donald Worden because he had his negative side. And it exposed people to some heavy books. And Huey was a part of that study. So people like Ron Dellums went through that. A guy named Ramses, who you became a judge later, and you can talk about that later, was a part of that. It was a host of heavyweights. And then Kamala Harris's mother and father and others. And so the point is that when you talked about the strike, for example, the San Francisco state strike, I had noted before that students said that the intellectual and political inspiration for them to launch that strike came from Malcolm X and Donald Worden. And what they meant was they could defend a position. They knew enough about the history and culture that they could take a stand against all comers, and that includes professors, and intellectually defeat them. And so that gave them intellectual self-confidence. And so that is at least the positive that Huey drew from the Afro-American Association. And as you know, the negative, Huey would leave it because he saw that Worden wouldn't fight because they would have street rallies and they would get attacked by these racist whites. And of course, Huey would be there duking down, protecting Donald Worden. Donald Worden would run off. And that to him, that is a no-no. You know what I mean? That was one. And then he was critical of the prices that Worden was charging as a lawyer to his clients. And then later, I would say that there were bound to be conflicts between Huey and Donald Worden, later El Mansour, because Huey was on a more radical path coming from the streets. And Donald Worden was a moderate conservative, more a mixture of Booker T. Washington, trying to give you the talk of Malcolm, but didn't have the walk, and ended up endorsing Barry Goldwater for president and was driving around in a Rolls Royce. Now, the Afro-American Association said the reason was because they wanted to prove that blacks weren't in the back pocket of the Democratic Party, so some would be, Republicans. But why would you take that position when you're going with Goldwater, one of the most crackers you ever lay your eyes on? You know what I mean? So that was El Mansour, but that was an influence on Huey because Huey is beginning to, get some intellectual depth and doing some homework. He teaches himself how to read and starting to hit the books. And this was key to any kind of change. Could you talk about what you see as the influence of Malcolm X on the Black Panther Party and on Huey Newton and any others?
Yeah, well, I remember I remember Huey and Bobby talking about when Malcolm came back from Mecca, and when he came back from Mecca, and he wanted to start the organization, which they had actually wanted to be a part of at one point, to join a part of. I think that was the beginning of the influence in the context of organizing the Black Panther Party, in the context of self-defense, social programs by any means necessary, when they talked about that. And so I think all that played into the vision of what the broad vision of what the Black Panther Party was implementing, like the 10-point platform and program, and the necessity for defending the self against the raids of the Klan, all those things. Yeah.
Huey, in his book Revolutionary Suicide, he talks about attending a conference at McClymonds High School. McClymonds is an all-black high school that's still in Oakland, and has graduated some very notable people. Bill Russell was one of the people that went to McClymonds. And so Huey attended a conference, and it had to be around 1963, called The Mind of the Ghetto. And it was sponsored by the Afro-American Association. The brother who chaired San Francisco C.O.R.E before me, Will Ussery, he attended and was a speaker at that conference. Malcolm X spoke, and at that time, Cassius Clay, this is before he becomes heavyweight champion of the world. So this had to be 1963. It had to be, noting he doesn't list the date there, but knowing Malcolm's movements at that time, that was the same time. It may not have been the same day, but around the same months where we met leaders in the San Francisco Freedom Movement with Malcolm for about 3 hours, hammering out strategy and also putting some criticism on it. We've talked about that before. Huey talks about the impression that Malcolm left on him. And he said basically that he was dressed in a loose-fitting suit, kind of what he expected an ex-con to be wearing, that he was better spoken than most professors, and that he was very sharp and very clear about his direction. So you could see in Huey's description of that, and this is in 63, a few years before the formation of the Black Panther Party, and Huey's still engaging in some street activity at this point, that this is beginning to have some impact on him. So Malcolm was that influence. And of course, Malcolm talked about by any means necessary. Malcolm talked about the need for self-defense. Malcolm was a revolutionary, in the nation and out, more revolutionary out. And he was looking at the world, and supporting struggles for liberation all over the world. So you could see how that would be an influence on the Black Panther Party, because it was on the Black Arts Movement. The Black Arts Movement basically saw itself attached to Malcolm. And why shouldn't he? He was the most advanced thinker we had developed up to that point, and was bad. Now, Emory, Huey and Bobby arrive at a decision to form the Black Panther Party for self-defense. What led them to reach this decision, and define those 10 points and their relevance for the Black Panther Party, 10-point platform?
Well, I one of the things Bobby and them mentions with Huey, when they were observing the Watts riot, and they seen that you had these brothers and sisters with these cameras was taking pictures, and they had been studying the law, had access to the law books and what have you. And I think that kind of clicked with them in relationship to patrols and and watching cop watch, in the sense of patrolling and having articulating to people when they were being arrested their legal rights to only have to take the Fifth Amendment. That means not to say anything or to give their name, address, basic stuff like that. I think that had a great, the Watch riot stimulated that thinking for them. in that context in the Black Panther Party itself. And starting around because of it was a crisis situation, urgency of it. That's why it started with point number 7. We want to immediately end the police brutality and murder of Black folks in this country. And so that's why it started organized around point number 7. But at the same time, a riot organized around that, they were also consistently talking about the 10 points of the Black Panther Party. The power to determine justice of our poor and oppressed communities, of our Black community, and what have you. And so they were engaging with community people, and particularly, a lot of people don't know they had an advisory committee of middle class Blacks who were on this advisory. One of them was Ruth Bedford, who they did an article on her some years back when we did one of our anniversary celebrations. And I remember when we initially just worked on the paper there was the headquarters, and we worked out of Elder Street's studio apartment. Hugh used to bring her by with her partner, a friend. Then it was a brother named I think I can't think of his name right now, but he used to be with her. And I recall his turning around, they were talking, and some discussion came out about the breakfast program, and she said about why don't we have one out of her minister's church, which was Father O'Neill, Black minister, and the church was on 27th and West, which is still there. And we did implement a breakfast program out of that church. But then those were the folks who they used to interact with a lot. Was Ron Dellums when he was a state assemblyman before he became the congressman. He was a part of the advisory committee. Reverend Pinkert, who was Bishop Pinkert, which had the church on West Grand, right across from that big park there. And there were others who were, I think Ron Dellums, Lionel Wilson, I believe, was also part of that advisory committee. Yeah, during that time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's an important point you're making there, because the impression has been created by a lot of people that write on the Panthers that they had pretty well cut themselves off from the Black middle class and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. And in our discussions you're talking about, and then when you see what Hugh had to say, Bobby had to say, there were a lot of efforts to reach out and draw in people with talent. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever the talent was, grassroots, middle class, whatever. Mm-hmm. They were mindful of the fact that their need for that. So that's important.
Yeah, I mean, even when the school started, you had scholars and intellectuals and those who administered had those skills. Mm-hmm. Maya Angelou used to come and teach you at the school, talk to the kids at the school. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we had radicalized Ron Dellums through taking over the poverty program in '65. Dellums was a associate in charge of a social work program in the Hunters Point. Just got a master's in social work. And so Dellums said later, he told me, I joined that so I could keep you all honest. We had led a 6-year movement and didn't take a dime, but I respected it. And Ron Dellums, for people that don't know, was one of the most militant congressmen you've ever had, and anti-war advocate. And eventually, for 2 years, was in charge of the Armed Services Committee in the House of Representatives, in charge of the military budget. In fact, we had talked, and he said he wanted to get together and talk about that because he was worried. You know what I mean? In other words, would he live through that? And he was also an ex-Marine. But then, he was anti-war. He better be. He's coming out of Berkeley and Oakland. But that was he had integrity. Ron Dellums had integrity. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's an interesting thing to know, that you had people advising you and giving you some insights, and people were open to that. That's a good. Yeah. So what were some of the other points in the 10-point platform? What were some of the other points?
Point number 2, we want full employment for our people. Point number 3 was we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black community. Point number 4 is we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. Point number 5 is we want an education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. Point number 6 is we want all men to be exempt, all Black men to be exempt from military service. Point 7, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people. And point number 8, we want freedom for all Black men held in federal, state, county, city prisons, and jails. Number 9, we want all Black people, when brought to trial, to be tried in court by a jury of their peer group or people from their Black communities, as defined by the Constitution of the United States. And number 10 kind of sums it up. The 10 points is we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And our major political objective, a United Nations supervised plebiscite to be held throughout the Black colony, in which only Black colonial subjects will be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of the Black community as their national destiny.
I understand that that last one was added later when Huey was in jail and Eldridge had been pushing that.
It may have, yes, during that time, because at that time, those discussions were going on, and my responsibility was to lay the paper out and do those kinds of things. And I've heard some things of that, yes. Mm-hmm.
Eldridge,
I think that was one reason why we went to the United Nations at one point. We
right.
took it. Oh, yeah.
Eldridge had a meeting with me and again, brother named Dengani, who's just passed on, we were renting a headquarters on Ellis Street, who's leading the Afro-American Association, now Pan-African People's Organization. So he met with us to see if we would support this idea of a plebiscite, where Blacks would vote on whether or not they wanted a nation of their own in the US, which would probably be in the South. And we advised him that wasn't a good idea. And the reason was, you're not going to get a favorable vote. You know what I mean? Blacks ain't voting for that. And I had my own motives, but basically, you know, I thought it was laudable that they were thinking of that, because the Nation of Islam had included that as one of their platforms at one point. But, you know, that was a response. Now, I think that the comment on employment, there was also in there a part of that a guaranteed annual income.
Yes.
That's very important, because that idea is something that needs to be pushed today. That a lot of Blacks are at the $20,000 a year level, and now they're talking about getting a minimum income of $15 would put you at about $30,000 a year. No money, you know. And a guaranteed annual income would mean that whatever a person's base income is, that then the government would provide the rest of it so that they could live a decent life, 180,000, depending on the area of the country. And it would take very little to do that. All the money goes to the Defense Department and everything else. So that's a demand that should be run now. You know what I mean? That should be pushed now. Yeah. What do you see of the general relevance of the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party made then to today?
Well, the relevance of this is to be inspired by. That's what it is to be informed and to be enlightened and to be inspired by, and to begin to try to implement it in the context of now, in this time. Yeah, that's because they're relevant. I mean, they have not been achieved, maybe on individual personal levels, but not as a collective community level. You know?
Yeah. And another thing I compliment the party on is they broke this down in very simple fashion. What you want, what you believe. It also resembled the way the Nation of Islam described theirs, but theirs was, the Black Panther Party was more political. But that was something people could digest. You could
Mhm.
explain what you were about. And I thought, and it
Mhm.
was conceived, I understand Huey was dictating in about 25 minutes. So that wasn't bad. You know, that ain't bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Already complimented Huey on his definition of power.
Yeah, power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it. That's
yeah.
it. Now I've come
Mhm.
up with another definition, but I think that that's a heavy definition. And
Mhm.
one of the best definitions I've heard, and coming from somebody in his 20s, not
Mhm.
bad
Yeah.
at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I've noticed some people who actually took credit for that. I know some
Mhm.
people who
Mhm.
actually quote that. They've added a few things to it and put their name on it. That came
Mhm.
from Huey P. Newton. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Give them credit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was bad. Now, um, of all those points, 9
Mhm.
really in the summary of them on the 10th, and really a 10th point. Why did Huey and Bobby and Black Panther Party take up point number 7 as the first one to implement?
That was the urgency of it in the country, and and yeah, that was because of it was what, oh, 200-300 rebellions during that '60s period,
Mm.
and so it was the urgency and always being justified and having them so happen to having access in the program that they were in to law books, and he and Bob coming together, and that that brought it all together in the context of what they want, why they want to move forward.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the urgency of policing the police who were causing all these urban
Mhm.
rebellions that was a major influence for the
Mhm.
Black Panther Party. Every
Mhm.
one of them was caused by police violence.
Yeah.
But then to take a stand on that,
Mhm.
that took some guts.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. You had people out here who they would talk, youngsters talking tough, but when it came to the police, they going the other way.
Uh,
I mean, it was so intense sometimes that who Bobby had to take a relief, drink a beer or two when they
uh,
come off on patrol. Yeah,
oh
it
yeah,
was really, yeah,
because
because it could have went off at any time. Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
yeah.
That's right. Because on the one hand, they had surprise on their side in the beginning, so the police are surprised.
Hmm.
They're scared up to a point because they're seeing armed black men.
And they articulating the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And they're within the law, and that is
yeah,
really frustrating them. You
yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean? That
because they're telling them right then and there that we stand a legal distance away. We're not interfering, and we
Mhm,
have a right to be here. And if they ask about the gun, well, we have a Second Amendment. The Constitution gives the right.
mhm,
And they tell the brothers and sisters, well, listen, if they arrest you, what's your name? What's your name? We'll get you, bail you out. And sometimes, if they could, they bail them out, or they help them get lawyers, all that. Yeah,
mhm,
yeah.
mhm.
But then the community is looking at that too, and
Yeah,
so that brings about a whole nother consciousness, awareness, because they ain't never seen nothing like
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Some crazy black people.
yeah.
There's a crazy word that we had, and his father
Yeah.
was called that,
Mhm.
which was a compliment, really, because that meant you were brave
Mhm.
and you weren't going to let anybody step over you.
Yeah.
So that would scare some black people. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it was educating them.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
was just like your art was doing, it was
Mhm.
giving some spirit to people.
And not
Encourage
only, yeah,
them.
not only that, the 10 points had something that everybody, both the broad segment of the community, could identify with. I
Mhm.
remember one time early on, we were coming out of Bobby Seale's house. I was over there, and there was an elder in the community that he knew was stopping by, and he was talking with him. And he said, Bobby, he said, I like those programs, but I just don't like the gun. But so he had something there that he liked. You
Uh,
had those elements. You
uh,
had people who didn't like, who understood the self-defense, but didn't want to deal with it. But they wanted to contribute to the other aspects of the program.
right.
You see, so it had a broad appeal in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was a political program.
Yes.
Political program. Yeah, very
Mhm.
important. Um, but at the same time, as you said, you were on the edge, and anything
Yes.
could happen at any time, and at some points it did happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
But at the same time, people saw that you all had the dedication to stand up for the people, and it
Mhm.
encouraged some more folks to stand
Yes.
up.
Yes.
One concrete case was the Denzel Dowell case.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and it was, the Panthers'
Yes.
response to that. Could you
Yeah.
explain that? What
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Well, it was a brother named Mark Comfort who was in the civil rights movement, who had been to the South, or what have you, who was dealing with the Denzel Dow family, but he felt that Hugh and them could better help, and that was the same time I was coming around, and Hugh and them got in contact with the Dow family, went out to North Richmond, young brother who was, I think, 13, 16, 13, who had some mental problems, but was shot in the back, and they wanted to need some help from the Dow family. And so that's when we used to go to Richmond quite a bit, North Richmond. That was the hardcore area where they used to have all the garbage was out in that area, the garbage yard, it smelled, fumes, all that.
Mhm.
Only one way in and one way out. And we used to have rallies out there on the roofs, security and the whole bit, talking with the community. And it was unincorporated, and we was talking about incorporating because they could set up their own government, their own police department, their own local city council, or what have you. We even talked about that in Emeryville, doing that. But the only people who were only listening to it then was the sisters and brothers from East Palo Alto when they set up Nairobi
Yeah,
on
right.
East, yeah, because they were inspired by those conversations that they heard, and they did that for 20 years. But when we helped the Denzel Dow family, they were part of the delegation that went to Sacramento. It wasn't just Panthers; it was Panthers and non-Panthers, and there were men
So,
and women
so,
who were
so,
part of that delegation.
so describe what happened to Denzel Dowell.
Denzel Dow was, I think he was trying to get over a fence and from the police, and they shot him in the back, murdered him, and they needed help. The family needed assistance, and Mark Comfort was the brother who was assisting him. But then he felt that Huey and the Panthers could better help. So that got in contact with the Dow family. I remember when we went out there, and we came out there one time. They called us to say that when the sheriff, it was the Richmond police was coming out there. Not the police, they didn't have police, they had marshal then, but it was somebody from the local authorities who came there. And at that time, they said, "Well, we didn't have nothing to do. Y'all need to go to the sheriff's department." And so I remember we went to the sheriff's department in Martinez, and we had and they locked the door. They seen all these black men with these guns. The police locked the door. We couldn't even get it. They said, "No, y'all can't come in with it." It was a standoff for about a whole hour or so at the sheriff's department. Because we want to come in, they had a right to come in and have our guns and the whole bit. They didn't want to do that, So, it was a standoff, yeah. And they went out there to consult about the Denzel Dow murder and demand justice for Denzel Dow, yeah. That's when Martinez was really hit time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this is a part of the building phase, and
Yes.
Panthers is responding to issues affecting the Black community, and the Black community is responding by also supporting the Black Panther Party. And that's the point of this show, is to deal with the launching of the Black Panther Party. So in April of 1967, Huey and some other Panthers appear on a radio show. It's a call-in radio show. And in the beginning of the program, Huey and others on the show explain the 10-point platform, and placing a central emphasis on point 7, policing the police. One of the callers calls in, and his name was Donald Mulford. Donald Mulford was a conservative Republican state assemblyman from Piedmont. Now, people not from here don't know what that is. That is the elite area, one of the elite areas of Oakland, where the rich whites live. and he was a mouthpiece for the white power elite in Oakland that ran the city. So he announced as a call-in to Huey and other Panthers that he was going to introduce a bill into the state legislature of California that would make it illegal for Panthers to patrol with weapons, something that was legal prior to that legislation. And a lot of cops, I understand, had pushed for that.
Yes, yes, absolutely, they did. Yeah, because they didn't know how to deal with it.
Right.
You know, a whole different context. Then maybe today they call us terrorists, or try to call in and wipe us off the map and call us terrorists. But they didn't know how to deal with that. Because you were citing the law. Here, black men with your gun and know the law,
Right.
and articulate it while and not interfering, but demanding that those who are being arrested, brothers and sisters, not be brutalized. You know. Yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting contradiction there is this: that the Panthers were standing on their constitutional right to defend themselves, and then there were gun laws that permitted you in California to carry weapons in public, and certain technical things about not carrying a concealed weapon and all this kind of stuff. But basically, this was Second Amendment protection, and then each state had its own way of defining that. But as you all knew then, and we definitely know now, the Second Amendment wasn't really written for black people.
No.
It was very smart for us to claim it. You understand? Because they say we're citizens, so claim it. But it was really written to justify white militias and white slave patrols to be armed against blacks. That was the real purpose. And when Madison's writing the Constitution, he has to really be clear about that, because he had a whole bunch of whites in this country that did not did not want a federal system to begin with. And they were arguing that a federal system was going to put them in danger, that blacks could be armed and go up against the system of slavery. So Madison had to make it real clear that the Second Amendment was about containing blacks. But at the same time, it says the citizens of the United States have the right to defend themselves, blah, blah. You have a right to a militia, blah, blah, blah. So the Panthers was using it to, as Huey said, push the contradiction. You know what I mean? And, rightfully so. So Emory, Huey makes the decision to send an armed group of Panthers to Sacramento in response to the Mulford legislation. Why did he make this move? And describe Executive Order number 1.
Okay. Well, the move was meant to go to observe the legislation that was being passed in relationship to Mulford bill that they were trying to debate or discussing in the assembly. And so there was a meeting the morning before we went to Sacramento and Oakland, and it was explained why. Because this is still in the infant stages of the Black Panther Party, early phases, explaining why Huey would be staying behind and Bobby would be leading the delegation. And that was because they felt what we call then a colossal event. It would be a colossal event, really a lot of press and what have you there. And it needed somebody back here in case there was arrest or whatever took place to communicate what the Black Panther Party was about. And at that point, Huey and Bobby were the primary ones that could deal with that. And so that's why we decided one would go and the other one. And Bobby being because it had come to that point where Huey had already been decided that Bobby was the best communicator, speaker, that he should be the one who represent the party as the chairman and the speaker for the party. And Huey would sit back and communicate with the radio station, whatever questions thing came up about it. And so that's why it was said that we would carry the guns, but they were going to be put them in the trunk. It wasn't going there for no gunplay, but going there to exercise the right constitutional rights with the guns. And so when we got to the state capitol, we took the guns out. Denzel Dow family came there. Some of the Dow family, his sisters and brothers were there. Mark Comfort, the brother I mentioned, who turned him on to the Dow family, was organized in far East Oakland. And he had a collective of brothers who went, and the Panthers. So this was a collective beyond just the Panthers who were there. Mm-hmm. And so when we got there and took the guns out and were heading on to the Capitol grounds in front of the Capitol building, it just so happened that day, Ronald Reagan, who became president of the United States later, was the governor, was holding a press conference. And about 10 feet away. And the press seen us and they all came over to where we were. And they rushed him off. We said he was red. And they rushed him off. And they started, and Bobby explained why we were there, because nobody was supposed to talk but Bobby. And he explained why we were there. And then he read, we were going to observe the legislation and what have you. And then he read the executive mandate number 1. And the executive mandate number 1 was the Black Panther Party for self-defense calls upon the American people in general and Black people in particular to take careful note of the racist California legislation now considering legislation aimed at keeping Black people disarmed and powerless, while racist police agencies throughout the country intensified the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of Black people. At the same time that American government is waging a racist war of genocide in Vietnam, the concentration camps in which Japanese Americans were intended during World War II are being renovated and expanded. Since America has historically reserved its most barbaric treatment for non-white people, we are forced to conclude that these concentration camps are being prepared for Black people who are determined to gain their freedom by any means necessary. The enslavement of Black people at the very founding of this country, the genocide practiced on the American Indian, and the confinement of the survivors on reservations, the savage lynching of thousands of Black men and women, the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and now the cowardly massacre in Vietnam all testifies to the fact that towards people of color, the racist power structure of America has but only one policy: repression, genocide, terror, and the big stick. Black people have begged, prayed, petitioned, and demonstrated, among other things, to get the racist power structure of America to right the wrongs which have historically been perpetrated against Black people. All of these efforts have been answered by more repression, deceit, and hypocrisy. As the aggression of the racist government escalates in Vietnam, the police agencies of America escalate the repression of Black people throughout the ghetto of America. Vicious police dogs, cattle prods, and increased patrols have become familiar sights in Black communities. City Hall turns a deaf ear to the plea of Black people for relief from this increasing terror. The Black Panther Party for self-defense believes that time has come for Black people to arm themselves against this terror before it is too late. The pending Mulford Act brings the hour of doom one step nearer. A people who have suffered so much for so long at the hands of a racist society must draw the line somewhere. We believe that the Black community of America must raise up as one man to halt the progression of a trend that leads inevitably to their total destruction. So this was executive mandate number 1. That when it captured the attention of those press up there was read, and then we went into the Capitol. And the press led us into the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And we didn't break the law. We ain't like you seen that in D.C. None of that. They opened the doors and we welcomed in with the press. Didn't know where the chambers were, but the press found out where it was up on the second floor, and we followed the press. And so when we go up to the chambers to go into the first one go into the chambers where the legislation is being discussed and passed, the first thing they say is get the cameras out of here. We follow right behind. They say, get your guns out. So we all turn and leave. We leave and go on the state capitol for about 10, 15 minutes. Then we leave, go to fill a station about a couple of 4 blocks away. And at that time, we take the guns, put them in the trunk, and have them out. This policeman comes by on this motorcycle, see all these black people with these guns. He get on this with their thing. And next time, you have them coming, helicopters and everything swooping down on us. They snatching the guns. They jack the chambers into around, make them in violation of the local gun ordinance, so they can charge no charges, and they arrest us. And so we go to court, and we're in jail, and we finally go to court. And then to make a story short, is that because you have to call the people now, all the country saying, we Panthers, we want to join the Panthers, and we had to do organizing. So it was this, and at the same time, they didn't know all who had guns. They knew Bobby Seale, maybe little Bobby Hutton, Panther, and a few others. But they didn't know all who had guns. So they wanted to make a deal with our lawyer that we would plead guilty to a non-supervised probation for 6 months, meaning that we wouldn't have to report none of that, just plead guilty. And so we agreed to that because the organizing needed to be done. And so they wanted, Bobby said they wanted, I think it was 7 to 10, 11 of us to plead guilty. And I was one of those who he chose to plead guilty out of the broad group of us who went. And so we came back to go to court, and we went into court, and the judge went for the judge and asked the judge. The judge asked us how we plead. We said guilty. And after that, we just turned around and was getting ready to walk out. He said, no, y'all going to jail. They set us up. So we had went to jail. Yeah.
And I understand Bobby served something like 6 months. How long?
Yeah, somewhere around about 6 months or something close. He was in there for a while. Yeah.
How long did you serve?
I think I did about 2 or 3 weeks at the minimum. Then there was a couple others who did the same time. Then there was some who did a month or 60 days, those kinds of things. Yeah. And little Bobby Hutton went to juvenile. I think little Bobby Hutton did about 3 months or 6 months because you juvenile, you get more time as a juvenile than you did as an adult for the same things. Yeah.
Yeah, Bobby was your first recruit. And how old was you? Remember
how old was little Bobby? Little Bobby Hutton? Well, they mentored him. And when they were starting, when they had it at the law office, they mentored him. And they had to get permission from his mother for him to join the Black Panther Party. Yeah. And I remember when little Bobby would be acting up, Miss Hutton would call and tell Bobby Seale. And I remember one time Bobby and I asked me to come and go with him. He went by Miss Hutton. And we standing on the porch, and she comes to the door and had a little Bobby there. And she said, Bobby, he ain't been doing his homework. He been talking back. He been staying out late. He ain't doing what he's supposed to do. And Bobby Seale told him, said, look, if you got to obey your mom, be respectful, or you're going to be suspended from the Black Panther Party. After that, he straightened up.
Yeah. Right on. Now that's some good extended family parenting.
Yes.
With a political edge to it.
That's right. Yeah.
So I understand that Huey went out and got on a radio show and raised money, got you bail. And then your attorney came in, and Eldridge was facing a problem because he was on probation, parole. And so they had to make it clear that he wasn't a part of the demonstration. He was there as a reporter for Ramparts magazine.
That's how he was able to follow the Panthers.
Yeah,
because he would have been in violation of his parole.
Right.
And Hugh and them knew of him how they had met him, and when they met him at the when Sister Ben Shaz came. Thereafter, they were trying to recruit him to be right for the paper. But he couldn't be connected in that way because he was been in violation of his parole.
Right.
But because Rampart being somewhat a progressive publication, they allowed him to cover the Panthers
Mhm.
as a reporter. Therefore, whatever he did was for rap artists. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
It
that
was
saved him because I
yeah.
saw that legal defense. Because otherwise, he'd have
Mhm.
been straight back out in San Quentin. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So also, it was kind of funny reading this, how Bobby describes when they're coming to the Sacramento. They didn't even know where the Capitol was. He said it's got a
Yeah.
dome.
Yeah.
Find a place with a dome.
Yeah.
And then when they get in, he
Yeah.
said, "We got to go to the place that passes legislation." So he
Yeah.
wanted to go to the assembly.
Yeah.
Both houses do, but the assembly. So he
Mhm.
got directed there. So it was all
Mhm.
kind of funny. And then he made the comment when he's leaving. He says, "Oh, Huey told me I got to read this statement." And then he
Yeah.
got up
Yeah.
and read
Yeah.
Executive Order number 1, which
Yeah.
was
He met it. He did read it when we first got there. Though. Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then read it again.
Yeah. He must have read. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but that was important because it meant that this demonstration had political purpose. It was announcing that it was a fight that blacks had to wage against repression. It was putting it in a context of
Mhm.
genocide. It was also locating it in the oppression of other people in this country, like Japanese Americans, and
Mhm.
even going to World War II and Hiroshima and
Mhm.
Nagasaki, dropping atom bombs on them and stuff.
Mhm.
So, and it's calling on black people to defend yourself. So,
Mhm.
but within a political context, again,
Mhm. Yes.
smart. You're making a political statement. So, what was the effect of that demonstration on the party?
Well, I had a great impact. Great impact because you had people calling all over the country, like they did when Huey got after when Huey got shot, saying they were Panthers, sending them. They wanted to join chapters, and so you had to figure out who all these folks were, and so you had to start sending people around, and then having them come out to Oakland to see if they were capable of dealing and setting up and organizing chapters. There were times when there weren't. Some folks weren't the ones who could really do set up the chapters that were taking place. Some of them were still in the gang banging. Some of them still. One of the groups had a lecture chair. They were gang bangers. I said no.
They had a real electric chair that worked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why we had to start sending people around. Just say we got to check these, see who they are, get a feel, have them come
Mhm.
out. And
Mhm.
then when we started selling papers, have political education classes, those who set up chapters and branches had to come out and be a part of the meet everybody, sit in on the political education classes, sell papers, everything else that was being done, and they could go back and set up the whole that structure. But then they had to send in weekly reports
Mhm.
in the context of what they were about, what they were doing, those kinds of things. Yeah. And as it evolved, you got more people with skills, because you seen the vision of growth and needed people who had these administrative skills and who could communicate on certain levels with certain people that other grassroots, say hardcore panelists weren't able to do that, and that wasn't their skill. And
Mhm.
so you had to observe those kinds of things and have folks who could go out and talk and do the press conferences, do the discussions at the rallies or what have you. All those dynamics came into play as we evolved and setting up structures in the context of living conditions situation, because you had people who come in who wanted to volunteer and then wanted to work on an everyday basis, but they had to work, they had jobs. So you had to figure that out by getting housing and places for folks to live and collectors, so they wouldn't have to have their worries. And then a lot of those who did cut their jobs loose came in and worked, those kinds of things. Then we had Panthers who had been into the military, who had this GI loan. So we used the GI loan to get housing.
Mhm.
And plus some of our allies and stuff who helped us purchase homes. You had the Quakers who helped us at one point, but
Mhm.
then we knew people who were in real estate who assisted us with getting apartments and housing and what have you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it was all those dynamics that went into, you know, setting up. And then you had to have you had the responsibilities of who was going to clean the houses, the dish, all those things, in conjunction with the daily work that one may have done in whatever areas of responsibility that they're working at. If we were at the health clinics or at the school or in the community doing whatever community we were doing, once you came home that evening, if you looked on the list and you knew that your time was to do security from 11 to 12 or 12 to 2, then you had to be on security, looking out the windows, maybe checking around the housing, if it was housing that we lived in or what have you. And, you know, and if your responsibility to deal with the chores, washing dishes, cleaning up the floor, whatever it was. Yeah. And the children were all of our kids, we said. So that meant that everybody had to be responsible for the kid. Yeah. I remember how we set up the child care centers was Bobby was out when Bobby ran for, I think, for mayor or probably before that. He was in the community and he was talking to this sister, and she had all these kids she was taking care of, just in the community. And he came back and said, if we did that on a broad scale, that could have a great impact on child care, and people would be inspired by that. And that is how it evolved into the whole child care system in the context of us doing it and showing how it could be done. Yeah. Because we had child care centers. Yeah. Not just for Panthers, but just for community kids, along with the Panther kids.
Yeah. Needed today because a lot of people who are working, they're paying so much child care that they can't afford it. You know? Yeah. So the Sacramento protest against the Mulford law really launches the Black Panther Party nationally and internationally.
Yeah, because that's when I started. That's the first paper that I worked on. That's when we started the tabloid. The first was that legal size sheet of paper about the Denzel Dow murder, which Bobby was typed on a typewriter, and Elbert Dickman House was the editor for that, and Bobby did the markers of the head masking and did the headlines with markers, you know. Yeah. So it was after that when I began to work on it. When I seen them working on that particular paper, the first one, that legal size sheet of paper, and I told him I could help him improve it. And I went and got my materials that I had for City College when I took up commercial art. Came back, they said, "Well, we finished, but you've been hanging around, and you seem to be committed. So we want you. We want you to work on the paper and help." And they say my first title was revolutionary artist. They say you'll be the revolutionary artist, then you become the minister of culture. And they talked about the paper being be to tell our story from our perspective, and to be like a double-edged sword. It can praise you on the one hand and criticize you on the other. And they said because you had a large segment of the community that wasn't a reading community, but they learned through observation and participation, that they will try to have headlines and photographs with captions and artwork, so they could get those folks to get the gist of the story of what was going on, just by seeing the photographs and the captions. And they're also trying to make it readable for seniors as well. The text, whenever possible, to make the text so it could be readable for the elders as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in part 2 in building the party. So is there anything you want to do to summarize the achievements of the Black Panther Party as it gets off the ground? Anything?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So this was a major achievement because that was a big propaganda achievement, that armed presence of blacks in Sacramento. Because even though some people heard Executive Order Number 1, what most people did was they saw armed blacks standing up and then making a statement that this is in defense against attacks carried out against blacks, genocidal attacks, oppressive police attacks. So this was a brilliant piece of propaganda, but it also put you in an interesting position where you're drawing in a lot of members, but you're not prepared. You've got to now get up there and prepare for this, to run a growing organization. So this is the big challenge, but it
Yeah.
was done quickly, and it would put you in the driver's seat in terms of Black organizations at that point in the United States, the Black Panther Party. So this has been a beautiful opening, Emory. I really want to thank you for your insights. And as Brother Worley Smith says, thank you, Emory Douglas, for your courage, insight, dedication, and talent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, that extends to all the other Panthers who made great contributions as well. So I really want to thank you. And I just want to say this to the people who are watching this. This is one example of commitment to struggle and revolutionary change. And I always say the first thing about being revolutionary is being a good human being. That's the key. And if you don't have good humanity, everything else is going to fall by the wayside. You can have all the beautiful ideas in the world, all the great principles. But if you got people who don't have a humane sense within them, when they come to power, good luck.
Yeah.
So luck was a German god. You want to put your hands in a German or anyone who hasn't got your interests at heart, I'd say good luck, because that's all you're standing on. So that's what I like. I've said this to you before. What I like most about you is your character, and then your lifetime of commitment. You've done a beautiful body of work for our people. Beautiful, brother.
Thank you.
We're proud of you. Proud of you. And I'm your elder, so I'm saying this personally as well. So let's go to some comments, see if any people have any questions. There's a comment here by Worley Smith. Whenever Black people develop ideas of self-help, there has been criticism and opposition, always has been and continues to today. Courageous leadership begins with discussion and education like this. Got any comment on that?
Well, that's I agree with what he says, but it was because I think that we had an organization that was committed, and we did it in spite of those who were trying to reject, to tear down, or didn't understand what it was about. So
Right.
we had organization that was the key. It wasn't just an individual thing; it was a collective thing.
Exactly.
And it was all we were unified in the context of chapters and branches across the country, implementing to the degree that they could in those areas that they were doing the work in. Yeah.
Mhm. Right. And this is not a popularity contest. So if
Yes.
you think in a struggle for change, popularity is going to be it,
No.
ain't no brownie points.
No.
The same brother, Worley Smith, makes a comment. It takes a community of people with varying perspectives to achieve common goals. Professors, police, politicians, and professors, indeed, articulators, actors, and artists. What's your comment on that?
Well, I agree. Well, and it depends on the context. If you talk about a broad mainstream context, or you talk about an organization that's totally independent of those structures, and they're trying to point out the contradictions within those structures, and so that they can, and so you can be free to do that, based on your observation and insight about it. Yeah. So you got the variables in that context. We stood outside of that in that context, but you had those who were inspired by and in agreement with us, both inside and outside of the system itself.
You had made a comment about Nairobi, and some people wouldn't know what that was. The Cinnabar.
Yeah, that was East Palo Alto at one time, which is going back to being named East Palo Alto. But for 20 years, it was called Nairobi.
Right.
And the sister came because we used to have forums on Sunday, community forums. At the school became a community center in the evenings and the weekend because it was that huge. And so we had a Sunday forum, and the sister came and acknowledged that she wanted to thank the Panthers in relationship to when we were talking about to unincorporated areas coming in and setting up their own police departments, setting up their own local governments, and what have you. But then what the whole context is like, things are ongoing process, and you run into obstacles and stuff like that that you may not have vision or thought about to come in and can destroy that. And that's what they did in East Palace. That's what they did in Nairobi, because it was legally. I mean, they got the papers, everything. It was legal for 20 years. But when the .com wanted to come in and they wanted to take it over, Silicon Valley and all down in that area, they let crime fester, gang banging, all that happen, so they could demonize it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they couldn't get the funding that was local governments would get to maintain it. So you had those dynamics that came in, and they had to, acknowledge that and move on. So some lessons are learned in that too. You have to think how long range vision, short range vision.
Yeah, right. There's a brother named Omowale Satterwhite, who was the leader of that movement. He's still in what was formerly called Nairobi. He had been assistant superintendent of schools there for a while, and he's a community organizer. He's still doing community organizing there. And I think part of that change also occurred with the demographic shift in terms of
yes, that's right. Yeah,
shifting away from majority Black to other groups, and I think that also played a role. Brother named Quadro Dieterville. It's good to see you, brother. Haven't seen you for a while. He made a comment. He said, "I think Donald Warden, Khalid Abdullah El Mansour, eventually became an OPEC lawyer." That's correct. He became a lawyer. In some ways, had some attachments to the royal family of Saudi Arabia, and made a lot of money, and became a Muslim when his money started coming from oil money, because he had been a Christian before that. You know what I mean? So let's see here. Higher Hecka. Poor education can lead to prison. Knew that one. Didn't think of the military. Very true. Any comment on that?
No, I get it. He said he didn't think of the military in the context of education.
Yeah. He's saying poor education can lead to prison. He knew that. He didn't know that poor education could lead to the military.
Well, when they define you, you believe whatever they tell you. You're gonna get a living. They have our parents and saying, go to jail, go to put it in the military. If you to survive, they look at it as a point of survival of getting the education.
Right.
But what happens is when you see it, the enlightenment, and now they're using it in the Black colleges. That's where they're recruiting at. All these Black universities all around the country. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when the wall broke out, when they had Iraq, they said, and the youngsters were talking about, no, we didn't sign up for that. We thought we were gonna get education. No, y'all got to go over there and die, and come back maimed and all the other things psychologically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Higher Hecka, he makes a comment here that I think needs a comment on your behalf. He says, "I have heard of the new Black Panther Party, though I don't think it is anywhere near popular as the previous party." So you want to make a point about, I think he's talking about the Black Panther Party. Oh, here he's talking about the new Black Panther Party. Yeah. Yeah, you want to make a comment
Well, it's based on how the community identifies with you and what you're doing for the community. And we've always had said that, the community going to identify, it may have some connections to the community, but when you talk about serving the community, and you have to get into this program, that 10-point platform program, you have to implement programs, what's in the interest of the community, That's important. If people get caught up in the symbolism, the berets, the gun, all that. But that, that was serious business. But you have to do the work. When you do the work, it's like a 9 to 5. You're doing 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And it's about work. It's about implementing programs and making sure that they, can meet the needs of the community. Yeah. Can I skip out for 1 minute to the restroom and come right back, please?
Yeah.
Quick. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll be right back.
And we'll be through in a minute too. I see. So the new Black Panther Party, that question is referring to a group that was organized after the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Khalid Muhammad was chair of it for a while. And so they have called themselves the new Black Panther Party. And there have been varying reactions to it from people who have been in the Black Panther Party for self-defense, but they were inspired by this, by the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Let's see. Person named Sabu Jones, glad to know you all are alive and still working for the people. Brother, well,
can you hear me?
Okay? Yeah, you okay?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I in the early days of the party, as we evolved, we got caught up in the rhetoric, spouting rhetoric, and in the uniforms and the whole bit. And it came to the point that it was observed, and that direction came down from Huey and others, that we got to get out the uniforms because we're out there just spouting rhetoric. We ain't doing the programs. We got to get out there dressed like the people and begin to implement these programs. You see, so the importance of it was not just the uniform itself, when the symbolics has a great impact. It stands for struggle and resistance, but it's your practice and what you implement and what you do.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and that's showing another phase of the party too.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to attract members based on how you look.
Mm-hmm.
Posturing, which was important too.
Yes.
But now,
you have to go beyond that. Yes.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Quadro Dieterville comment: salute and respect to Baba Emory Douglas, who is an excellent role model for contemporary revolutionary artists, and also makes himself accessible to us for art show collaborations and projects. Yeah, right on, brother. That's important because the younger generation is looking for support, and contrary to popular opinion,
yes,
a lot of them want to do some good for our people. A whole lot.
Oh yeah. That's what I do. There's a lot of young folks out there who are trying to figure out how they can use their art and their creativity in the context and service of the community in some ways. Yeah. At the same time, they know they got to make a living and what have you.
Yeah, exactly. Dark Matter, True Talk, the organization Black Panther Party put tangible work in. Many didn't give a second thought to giving their lives up to get works. So this is a comment, praising the dedication of the Black Panther Party. I just want to say in concluding this, the second part of this will be on June the 4th, and we'll be discussing the growth of the party and the various challenges that it had. And then subsequent shows, we'll get into other aspects. Next week will be on twin lineal families, communities, and nations, and it's going to be expanding on the mother principle, because part of what these discussions are about is creating just societies. And this is about just family systems where males don't rule females and females don't rule males. And it's the basis for creating justice on all levels of society. So that'll be next week. We encourage people to subscribe to the show and also make a subscription in terms of making a donation. Those donations don't go to me. We have to hire someone that's good at recruiting subscribers, and that costs some money. Most of us, all of us on this show are doing this for free, and I put up a substantial amount of my own money, 25,000 last year, and I'm not taking any corporate money. I spent my life fighting corporate power. Capitalism's no good, and we're not asking for this to get rich. We just need to be able to finance this show, and I can't go broke doing the show. So I appreciate those who have made their contributions. I really appreciate it. It's been helpful. And if more of them do this as well. Lady Kay Mosley, who's just come off of a hip operation. I saw you yesterday. You look like you're recovering well. She said, thank you both for your contributions. We need more to create safe space for the P.P.O. And she's a member of the Fred Hampton Gun Club.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And she's well equipped. Her weapons are up to date.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been beautiful, brother. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and your insights. And this show is especially dedicated to young people. It's for all of our people, but especially it's passing on information to the younger generation. And we'll be doing leadership training and organizing training on this show. The foundation for this is being laid in previous shows that we've done. And I'll be calling on you, Emory, to help with some of that training, you know what I mean? Which you're doing right now, because this is a very important document on a very important organization, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and the contributions it's made to our people. So thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Any closing comments you want to make?
Well, I would just say, Black Panther Party is to be inspired by, left a blueprint to be inspired by, and so that's the legacy of it. In that context, it implemented the programs and stood up for courage, and with in the context of for community power, and so that's it. Yeah, for now.
One of our dedicated viewers of this show made the comment that she was surprised at how young the Panthers were. And you could say that's generally characteristic of liberation movements.
Yes.
It's the youth that kick them off.
Mm-hmm.
It's the youth who haven't been brainwashed enough to believe that they should be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And Malcolm had predicted this. He said
Mm-hmm.
He had predicted generational change. And he said basically that this younger generation coming up didn't have any fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the Black Panther Party was an expression of that very much.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we're proud of that.
Mm-hmm. And particularly that when they first got off on the patrols, he always articulated that those brothers and sisters who are out in the community being stopped and brutalized understood what the police were about firsthand. So they were the first ones to come in and to join the party,
right,
when it came into and really with the point number 7.
Right. And the party was very successful in recruiting grassroots blacks,
mm-hmm.
young, male and female. And we want in the next show talk about the sisters' contribution to the Black Panther Party,
Mm-hmm.
The grassroots, and that was extremely important. Urban grassroots,
Mm-hmm.
and that was extremely important.
Yeah.
So it made a very important contribution, and we're proud of it, and we have to learn from it. And next
Mm-hmm.
week after next, on the 4th of June, we'll be going into depth on that. So thanks,
Mm-hmm.
brother. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. You're quite welcome, brother.
Okay. Hotep.
Okay.